The rattlesnake's fangs sank deep before Caleb Mercer even saw it strike. Pain exploded up his arm like liquid fire, and the toy horse he'd been reaching for clattered to the porch boards. Inside the cabin, 4 babies slept, oblivious that their father was dying just feet away. Leo, 3 years old. Luke, barely 2. Hattie, 18 months. And Micah, still nursing at 6 months. No mother. No family within 50 miles. Just a widowed rancher and the venom racing toward his heart. Then, through the shimmering heat waves rising off the Wyoming dust, a figure appeared on horseback. A woman, riding straight toward his collapsing world. Before we begin this journey through heartbreak and hope, I invite you to stay with us until the very end. And please, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The morning had started like every morning since Sarah died. With chaos barely contained and grief pushed down so deep, Caleb could almost pretend it wasn't there. He'd woken at dawn to Micah's wailing, the baby's cries cutting through the thin walls of the ranch house like a saw through pine. His arms had moved on instinct, lifting the infant from the cradle Sarah had woven with her own hands, bouncing him against his chest, while his other hand worked to heat a bottle over the stove. The goat's milk never seemed quite right, too thin, too cold, never the perfect warmth that Sarah had somehow always achieved. Leo had appeared in the doorway then, his too serious 3-year-old face smudged with sleep. "Papa, Luke's crying again." "I know, son. I hear him." Caleb had tested the milk against his wrist, still cold, and cursed under his breath. "Go wash your face. I'll be there in a minute." But minutes multiplied like rabbits on this ranch. By the time he'd gotten Micah fed and Luke changed and Hattie unstuck from where she'd wedged herself between the bed and the wall, the sun was already climbing toward its merciless peak. The breakfast dishes sat crusted with egg and porridge. The laundry he'd meant to do yesterday had fossilized into a mountain of sour-smelling fabric. The fence in the north pasture needed mending before the cattle found the gap. And somewhere in the middle of trying to do 17 things at once, Leo's toy horse, the one Sarah had given him for his 2nd birthday, had tumbled off the porch. Caleb should have left it. Should have told Leo they'd get it later, after the babies were down for their naps, after he'd fixed the fence, after the world stopped demanding more than one man could give. But Leo's face had crumpled with that particular devastation only a 3-year-old can muster, and Caleb was so damn tired of seeing his children sad. "Stay right there," he'd told them, settling all 4 in the front room where he could see them through the open door. "Don't move. I'll be back before you can count to 10. Luke had immediately tried to follow him. Caleb had scooped him up, carried him back inside, and started the count himself. 1, 2, 3. He'd stepped off the porch, reached down for the toy horse lying in the dust. And that's when the rattler struck. Caleb saw it only as motion, a brown blur uncoiling from beneath the porch step. He felt the impact, twin points of fire punching through the thin fabric of his shirt sleeve. Then came the pain, immediate and all-consuming, like someone had driven hot railroad spikes into his forearm. "God damn!" He jerked back, stumbling, and saw the snake retreating into the shadows, its rattle buzzing a belated warning. His arm was already swelling. 2 neat puncture marks wept blood and clear fluid, and the skin around them was turning an ugly mottled purple. Caleb's medical knowledge was limited. He knew how to set a broken bone and stitch a cut, but he knew enough about snake bites to understand he was in serious trouble. The venom was already spreading. He could feel it, a cold numbness creeping up toward his shoulder, his heart starting to hammer in his chest, as his body recognized the poison coursing through his veins. Inside, one of the babies started crying. Hattie, probably, or maybe Luke. Caleb couldn't tell anymore. Their cries had started to sound the same in the months since Sarah died, variations on a theme of motherless misery. He tried to move toward the door. His legs felt distant, unreliable. The porch seemed to tilt beneath him, and he grabbed for the railing with his good hand. Splinters bit into his palm. "Leo!" His voice came out strangled, weaker than he'd intended. "Leo, stay inside. Don't come out here." But even as he said it, he could hear small feet pattering across the floorboards. Leo appeared in the doorway, the toy horse forgotten, his eyes going wide as he took in his father's condition. "Papa, You're bleeding. I know, buddy. I need you to. Caleb's vision blurred. The world tilted again, harder this time, and his knees buckled. He caught himself against a porch post, his bad arm hanging useless at his side. I need you to be brave, okay? Can you do that? Leo nodded, tears already tracking down his dusty cheeks. Good boy. I need you to watch your brothers and sister. Don't let anyone leave the house. I just need to... What? What did he need to do? Ride 15 miles to town for a doctor? He could barely stand, cut the wound, and suck out the venom. He'd heard that worked sometimes, but his hands were shaking so badly he'd probably just bleed himself out. The truth settled over him like a blanket made of lead. He was going to die here. On this porch, in the heat, while his 4 babies waited inside for a father who would never get up again. Sarah's voice echoed in his memory. Promise me if something happens, you'll take care of them. Promise me, Caleb. He'd promised. He'd sworn it on everything holy. And now he was breaking that promise because he'd been stupid enough to reach for a goddamn toy without checking for snakes first. Inside, Micah's wails reached a new pitch. Caleb could hear Luke trying to comfort him. Shh, baby, shh, in his small, uncertain voice. The sound nearly broke what was left of Caleb's heart. His legs gave out completely. He slid down the porch post, ending up sitting with his back against the rough wood, his useless arm cradled in his lap. The venom was moving faster now. His tongue felt thick in his mouth. His breathing came in shallow gasps. Through the tears blurring his vision, through the heat shimmer rising off the hard-packed earth of the yard, Caleb saw movement. At first he thought it was a hallucination, death playing tricks on his oxygen-starved brain. A figure on horseback, dark against the bright sky, riding up the long approach to his ranch. He blinked. The figure remained, drew closer. A woman. She sat her horse like she'd been born in the saddle, her posture straight despite the obvious miles behind her. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, a simple traveling dress the color of creek water, and saddlebags that bulged with supplies, including what looked like a cloth-wrapped bundle he would later learn contained a loaf of bread she'd baked that morning, intending to share it with whatever family gave her directions to the new schoolhouse. The woman dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, hitting the ground with surprising grace. Her eyes took in the scene with quick intelligence. The man slumped on the porch, the swelling arm, the small face peering terrified from the doorway. Snakebite. Her voice was Eastern educated, but not soft. There was steel underneath the cultured vowels. Caleb managed a nod, tried to speak. My children. I see them. She was already moving, already taking charge with the kind of calm competence that made Caleb think of field surgeons and frontier midwives, women who'd seen too much to panic at the sight of blood. How long ago? Few minutes. Good. That's good. We have time. She knelt beside him, her hands already working at the binding of his shirt sleeve. I'm going to need you to stay conscious for me, Mr. Mercer. Caleb Mercer. Mr. Mercer. I'm Clara Whitfield. I'm the new school teacher for this district, though that hardly matters right now. What matters is keeping you alive. She ripped his sleeve clean away from the shoulder, exposing the angry wound and the discolored flesh around it. This is going to hurt. Quite badly, I'm afraid. Try not to move. She produced a knife from somewhere, small, wicked sharp, with a handle worn smooth from use. Caleb's brain, fuzzy from venom and shock, tried to understand why a schoolteacher would carry such a thing. Then the blade bit into his flesh just above the bite marks, and he stopped thinking about anything except the bright new pain that whited out his vision. Clara worked with ruthless efficiency. She made 2 quick incisions, deep enough to bleed freely, then bent her head to the wounds. Don't. Caleb tried to pull away, horrified. You'll poison yourself. Be quiet. She spat blood into the dust. The danger from ingestion is minimal if one has no open sores in the mouth, which I don't. She bent again, sucked, spat. I've done this before. Once for a field hand in Boston who was bitten by a copperhead someone had imported as a curiosity. Stupid man survived despite his own idiocy. She repeated the process 3 more times, then used strips torn from her own petticoat to bind the wounds tightly. Her hands never shook. Her eyes never left her work. Now then. She sat back on her heels, studying him with eyes the color of creek stones after rain. You're not going to die, not today. But you're going to feel like death warmed over for the next several hours. How many children do you have? 4. The word came out slurred. The world was going soft at the edges, darkness creeping in from the corners of his vision. 4 babies. Wife died. No one else. If I die... You're not dying. I just told you that. Clara stood, brushing dust from her skirts with brisk motions. But you are going into shock, and you won't be caring for anyone until that passes. So I'm going to need to tend your children. Will they let a stranger handle them? Have to. Caleb's eyes were closing despite his best efforts. No choice. There's always a choice, Mr. Mercer. Today we're choosing to keep you and your children alive. Everything else can wait. She turned towards the house, where Leo still stood frozen in the doorway, and Caleb heard her voice go soft in a way it hadn't been while she worked on him. Hello there, sweetheart. What's your name? Leo's voice was barely a whisper. Leo Mercer, ma'am. It's very nice to meet you, Leo. My name is Miss Clara. I'm going to help your papa get better, but I need your help to do it. Can you be my helper? A pause. Then, yes, ma'am. Wonderful. First, I need you to tell me how many brothers and sisters you have. 2 brothers and a sister. Luke is 2. Hattie is, I don't remember, baby. And Micah is the baby. 4 children under 3 years old. Clara's voice held something that might have been awe or might have been horror. And your papa has been managing alone? Mama died. Papa says we have to be brave. Your papa is right, and you're being very brave right now. I'm proud of you. She climbed the porch steps, paused beside where Caleb sat. Her hand came down on his shoulder, steady and surprisingly strong. Mr. Mercer, I'm taking your children inside where it's cooler. I'm going to get them settled, and then I'm going to get you settled. After that, I'm riding to town for a proper doctor. Do you understand? Caleb tried to nod. His head lolled forward instead. Good enough. Her voice came from farther away now, from inside the house. Leo, show me where you keep the water and where your papa keeps the medical supplies, if he has any. Caleb lost time after that. He was aware of being moved, strong arms under his shoulders, his boots scraping across wood, the blessed coolness of shade. Someone pressed a tin cup to his lips and he drank without thinking, water cutting through the thickness in his throat. When he surfaced again, he was lying on the settee in the front room. The babies were quiet, an ominous sign under normal circumstances, but now it felt like a miracle. Through half-closed eyes, he could see Clara moving around his house with purpose, Leo trailing after her like a duckling following its mother. She'd found the medical kit Sarah had assembled, herbs and tinctures and bandages kept in an old ammunition box. Clara sorted through it with quick efficiency, selecting what she needed and discarding the rest. Your mama was a prepared woman, she said to Leo, not looking up from her work. These herbs are well chosen. Is this willow bark? I don't know, ma'am. It is. Good for pain and fever. Your papa is going to need both. She was grinding something in a bowl, adding water from the kitchen pump. Can you tell me when your mama passed? I see her things are still here, still organized. It can't have been long. Spring. Leo's voice went small. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. Papa says she's with the angels now. Clara's hands paused in their work for just a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentler than Caleb had yet heard it. I'm sure she is. And I'm sure she's very proud of what a good helper you're being. She brought the bowl to Caleb, helped him sit up enough to drink. The mixture was bitter as sin, but he got it down. Almost immediately, he could feel it working, not taking away the pain, but making it distant, manageable. Rest now, Clara told him. I'm going to see to your children, and then I'm going to ride for help. Your neighbor, do you have neighbors? Fletcher. The word came easier now, his tongue loosening as whatever herb mixture she'd given him took effect. Tom Fletcher, 5 miles south. Has a wife. I'll find them. She stood, already moving toward where Micah's cries had started up again. Sleep if you can, Mr. Mercer. You're going to need your strength. Caleb wanted to protest, wanted to tell her she didn't need to do this, that he'd manage somehow, that he couldn't possibly impose on a stranger this way. But his eyes were closing again, and the darkness was warm and welcoming, and somewhere in the distance he could hear Clara's voice singing something soft to Micah. A lullaby he didn't recognize, in a voice that made his chest ache with something that wasn't just venom. He let himself fall into sleep. When Caleb woke, the light had changed. Late afternoon now, the sun slanting gold through the western windows. His arm throbbed with a deep, persistent ache, but the burning had subsided. The swelling seemed less. His head felt clearer. And his house was different. It took him a moment to identify what had changed. Then he realized it was clean. Not just tidy, actually clean. The breakfast dishes had been washed and stacked. The laundry mountain had been conquered and hung to dry on lines strung across the back porch. The floor had been swept. Even the windows looked like someone had taken a rag to them. More than that, it smelled different. Like something was cooking. Something that wasn't burnt porridge or overcooked beans. Caleb pushed himself upright, gritting his teeth against the wave of dizziness that followed. His legs felt like water, but they held when he stood. He made his way to the kitchen, using the wall for support. Clara stood at the stove, stirring something in the big pot Sarah used to use for stews. She'd rolled her sleeves up past her elbows, and there was flour dusted across her cheek. At the kitchen table, Luke sat in his high chair, gumming a piece of bread. Hattie was on the floor nearby, playing with wooden blocks. Leo sat on a stool beside Clara, watching her work with rapt attention. And in the corner, in the cradle, Micah slept peacefully. "You should be resting," Clara said without turning around. "You're still weak." "How did you—" Caleb gestured vaguely at the transformed kitchen. "When did you—" "Children need routine and cleanliness to thrive. Your children have been suffering from a lack of both." She turned to face him, and her expression was matter-of-fact, not accusatory. "Through no fault of your own, I should add. One man cannot do the work of two parents. It's physically impossible." "I've been trying." "I know you have. Leo has told me about all the things you do every day. You've been keeping your children alive, Mr. Mercer, which is more than many men in your position would manage. But alive is not the same as thriving." She ladled soup into a bowl, real soup with vegetables and what looked like chicken, and brought it to the table. "Sit, eat. You need to rebuild your strength." Caleb sat because his legs were shaking too badly to argue. The first spoonful of soup hit his tongue and he nearly wept. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten something that actually tasted like food instead of fuel. "You didn't go to the Fletchers." It wasn't a question. "I did. Mrs. Fletcher has gone to town to fetch the doctor. He should be here by nightfall. Mr. Fletcher is handling the evening feeding for your cattle." Clara returned to the stove, adjusting something. "They were horrified to learn you'd been managing alone all this time as us. Fletcher wanted to come back with me, but she's 7 months along with child and shouldn't be riding that distance twice in one day. I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. Pride is a luxury, Mr. Mercer. You have 4 children who need you alive and healthy. That means accepting help when it's offered." She glanced at Leo. "Isn't that right, Leo?" "Yes, ma'am." Leo was watching his father with serious eyes. "Miss Clara says it's not weak to need help. She says even the strongest people need help sometimes." Miss Clara is right. Caleb took another spoonful of soup, then another. He couldn't remember being this hungry. Or maybe he'd been this hungry for months and had just learned to ignore it. "Thank you for everything. I don't know how to eat." "Don't thank me yet. The night isn't over." Clara wiped her hands on the apron she'd found somewhere, probably Sarah's, from the back of some drawer. "Luke needs changing. Hattie needs to be fed. Micah will wake soon and want his bottle. Leo needs a bath. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you do. And someone needs to read him a story before bed. And you need to rest so your body can fight off the rest of that venom." She said it all without judgment, just listing facts. But hearing it laid out like that made Caleb realize just how impossible his daily life had become. How he'd been failing his children while thinking he was doing fine. "I can help with some of that," he said quietly. "You can supervise. And you can tell me where things are. But the heavy lifting, as it were, is going to be mine tonight." Clara turned to face him fully, and her expression was kind but firm. "You nearly died today, Mr. Mercer. Your children nearly became orphans. The only reason that didn't happen is because I happened to be riding past at precisely the right moment. Some would call that luck. I call it providence. Either way, I'm not about to let you waste it by pushing yourself too hard too fast. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was fine, that he could handle his own children, that she didn't need to stay. But Luke chose that moment to start fussing, and when Clara moved to pick him up, the little boy went to her without hesitation, settled against her shoulder like he'd known her his whole life. Something cracked inside Caleb's chest. "How long can you stay?" The question came out rougher than he'd intended. Clara met his eyes over Luke's head. "How long do you need me?" "I don't know. A few days? Until I'm steady on my feet again?" "Then that's how long I'll stay." She said it simply, as if it cost her nothing, as if upending her entire life to care for a stranger's children was just something people did. "The schoolhouse can wait. You have a more pressing need. But your position will still be there next week. The children of this district have gone without a teacher for 6 months already. Another week won't hurt them." She shifted Luke to her other hip and started toward the back room. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a toddler to change and a baby who's about to wake up demanding his supper. Eat your soup, Mr. Mercer. Try to stay upright. If you feel faint, call for me." She disappeared into the back room, Luke babbling contentedly in her arms, and Caleb was left staring at his soup. Leo climbed down from his stool and came to stand beside his father's chair. His small hand found Caleb's good arm. "Papa, I like Miss Clara." "I know, buddy." "Is she going to stay forever?" "Forever." The word hung in the air like a prayer Caleb didn't have the courage to speak. "I don't know. I hope she does." Leo leaned against his father's side, warm and solid and alive. "She makes the sad go away a little bit." Caleb pulled his son close with his good arm, pressing his face against Leo's hair. And for the first time since Sarah died, he let himself imagine it. A house that wasn't just silent grief and desperate survival, children who laughed instead of just crying. Someone to share the burden that had been crushing him into dust for months. Someone like Clara Whitfield, who had appeared out of nowhere with nothing but competence and kindness, and a loaf of bread she hadn't even had time to offer before she was elbow-deep in saving his life. From the back room came the sound of Clara singing again, that same unfamiliar lullaby, something about stars and shepherds and finding your way home in the dark. Caleb closed his eyes and listened, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something that might have been hope. The doctor arrived just after sunset, riding hard with Mrs. Fletcher, following on a slower mare. Dr. Harrison was a grizzled man in his 60s who'd seen everything the frontier could throw at a human body and had developed a permanently skeptical expression as a result. He examined Caleb's arm by lamplight, prodding the wound with fingers that had forgotten how to be gentle decades ago. Clara stood nearby, arms crossed, watching every move he made with the intensity of a hawk watching a snake near its nest. "You're lucky," Harrison finally grunted, sitting back. Whoever treated this knew what they were doing. Clean incisions, good draw on the venom, proper binding. Another hour without treatment, and we'd be having a very different conversation. He glanced at Clara. "This your work?" "It is." "Where'd you learn it?" "Boston. A physician there took on female students for practical training. He believed women should know how to handle medical emergencies since we're often the only ones present when they occur." Clara's chin lifted slightly, as if daring him to challenge her credentials. Harrison just nodded. "Sensible man. You did good work. He'll be weak for a few days, might run a fever as his body purges the rest of the toxin, but he'll live." He turned to Caleb. "You need to rest. And I mean actual rest. Not that thing you've been calling rest where you still try to work a full ranch and raise 4 babies alone." "I don't have a choice." "You do now." Mrs. Fletcher stepped forward, her hands resting on her swollen belly. "Tom and I should have been helping all along. We knew Sarah passed, knew you were alone out here, and we let our own business keep us from doing the Christian thing. That ends today." "Martha, you don't need to—" "Hush." Martha Fletcher was a small woman with iron in her spine and a voice that could stop a charging bull. "Miss Whitfield has explained the situation. She'll stay here for the next week to manage the house and children. Tom will handle your cattle and any urgent repairs. I'll come by daily with meals once Miss Whitfield needs to take up her teaching position. And you, Caleb Mercer, will rest and recover and let people help you for once in your stubborn life. Caleb looked from Martha to Clara to Dr. Harrison, all of them watching him with expressions that made it clear this wasn't up for debate. Something in his chest loosened, some knot he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since Sarah died. "All right," he said quietly. "All right. Thank you." The words felt inadequate for what they were offering, but Martha just patted his good shoulder. "That's settled then. Now, I brought chicken and dumplings for tomorrow, and Tom's got your evening feed handled. Miss Whitfield, you need anything from town? More willow bark would be useful, and laudanum if Mr. Mercer's pain gets worse." Clara walked Martha to the door, the two women talking in low voices about supplies and schedules and all the mundane details that made survival possible out here. Dr. Harrison packed his bag, declining the offer of payment with a wave of his hand. "Call it even for all the times you've helped pull calves at my brother's place. Just promise me you'll actually rest." "I promise." "Good, because if you die and leave those babies orphaned, I'll find a way to bring you back just so I can kill you myself for being stupid." Harrison softened the words with something that might have been a smile. "Your Sarah was a fine woman. She'd want you alive and whole for those children." After they left, the house settled into quiet. Clara moved through the evening routine with Leo's help. Bottles for Micah, a simple supper of bread and butter for the older children, baths in the big tin tub she'd found hanging outside. She'd heated water on the stove, tested the temperature with her elbow like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Caleb watched from his chair, too weak to do more than supervise, and felt his heart crack open a little more with each gentle gesture. The way Clara dried Hattie's hair, patient through the tangles. The way she let Luke pour his own water, even though half of it ended up on the floor. The way she made Leo laugh by pretending to be a dragon who was terrified of soap. These children had been surviving. Now they were living again. When the babies were finally down, Leo in his little bed, Luke and Hattie in the crib they still shared, Micah in his cradle, Clara came back to the front room. She'd changed into a nightdress she'd borrowed from Sarah's trunk, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. "You should sleep too," she said, moving to bank the fire. "The doctor said you might fever tonight. I'll be listening for you." "Where will you sleep?" "Sarah's rocking chair, there by the cradle. I've slept in worse places." She caught his expression. "Don't argue, Mr. Mercer. You need the bed, and I need to be close to Micah in case he wakes. At least take some blankets. I have blankets. Now stop worrying about my comfort and focus on your own recovery." But her voice was kind as she said it, and when she helped him stand, her arm around his waist was steady and sure. She got him settled in the bedroom, Sarah's bedroom, though all traces of his wife had been carefully tucked away in trunks and drawers. The room smelled like lye soap and fresh air instead of sickness and grief. Clara had even changed the sheets. "I'll check on you in a few hours," she said, adjusting the blanket over him. "If you need anything before then, just call out." "Clara, Miss Whitfield, I don't know how to thank you." She paused at the doorway, silhouetted against the lamplight from the front room. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Mercer. This is what people do for each other, or at least what they should do." Then she was gone, leaving Caleb alone in the dark with his thoughts and the distant sound of her humming that lullaby again. He fell asleep to the sound of it and dreamed of Sarah smiling at him, telling him it was all right to let someone help, telling him it was all right to hope again. The fever came just before midnight, hot and sudden as a prairie fire. Caleb woke tangled in sheets soaked with sweat, his body shaking so hard his teeth rattled. The room spun around him, shadows stretching and warping into nightmare shapes. "Sarah?" He didn't mean to say it, but the word tore out of him anyway. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I tried. I couldn't." Cool hands touched his face. A woman's voice, low and steady, but not Sarah's. "Shh, Mr. Mercer. You're all right. It's just the fever. I'm here." "Can't do this alone," he mumbled, only half aware of what he was saying. "Too much. Too hard. The babies, they need you alive, and you're going to be alive. Do you hear me? This is just your body fighting. Let it fight." Something pressed against his lips. A cup. "Drink this." Slowly. He drank. Bitter herbs and cool water. His body rebelled, wanting to reject it, but Clara's hand on the back of his neck was firm. Again. One more swallow. He managed it. The room slowly stopped spinning quite so fast. Good. Her voice came from farther away now. He heard water being wrung from cloth, then coolness on his forehead, his chest, his arms. The fever will break soon. Dr. Harrison said it would come, and it has. Now it just needs to run its course. Stay. The word came out desperate, childish. Please, don't want to be alone. I'm not going anywhere. The bed dipped as she sat on the edge of it. Her hand found his, squeezed gently. Sleep if you can. I'll be right here. Caleb held onto her hand like a drowning man holds driftwood and let the fever carry him under again. When he surfaced next, gray dawn light was creeping through the windows and his nightshirt was dry. The fever had broken. Clara sat in the chair beside the bed, her head tilted at an uncomfortable angle, dead asleep. Their hands were still clasped together on top of the blanket. Caleb studied her in the thin morning light. Without the constant motion that characterized her waking hours, he could see the exhaustion in her face, the shadows under her eyes, the fine lines at the corners of her mouth that spoke of worries carried and sorrows endured. She wasn't a young woman, probably 30, maybe 32, old enough to have lived, to have lost things, to know that life out here wasn't the romantic adventure the Eastern newspapers made it out to be. And yet she'd stayed, had ridden for help, cleaned his house, tended his children, sat up all night with a fevered stranger. Why? As if sensing his scrutiny, Clara's eyes opened. For a moment she looked disoriented. Then awareness returned and she straightened in the chair, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. You're awake and lucid. She reached out to touch his forehead with the back of her hand. Fever's gone. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by cattle, but alive. He realized he was still holding her hand and reluctantly let go. Did you sleep at all? Enough. She stood, smoothing her borrowed nightdress. I should check on the children. Micah will be wanting his bottles soon. Clara, last night, did I... He couldn't quite remember what he'd said in his delirium, only that he'd said too much, revealed too much. You were feverish. People say all sorts of things when they're feverish. Her expression gave nothing away. Don't worry about it. But something in her eyes told him she remembered every word. The next 3 days passed in a blur of slowly returning strength and domestic routine. Caleb graduated from the bed to the chair, from the chair to short walks around the house, from the house to the porch, where he could sit in the sun and watch Tom Fletcher mending his fences. And through it all, Clara was there. Not hovering, not coddling, but present. A steady force that seemed to know exactly when to push him to do more and when to make him rest. She ran his household with quiet efficiency, learning where everything was kept and how each child liked things done. Leo appointed himself her constant shadow, trailing after her, asking endless questions about Boston and books and whether dragons were real. Luke grew brave enough to climb into her lap during story time. Even Hattie, who'd been wary at first, started reaching for Clara when she cried. Only Micah seemed to resist, fussing whenever Clara tried to feed him, arching away from her shoulder. It was the one thing that seemed to frustrate her. He knows I'm not his mother, she said one afternoon, walking the screaming baby back and forth across the front room. Babies can tell. He's just hungry. Caleb pushed himself up from his chair, still moving carefully. Let me try. He took Micah, settled into Sarah's rocking chair, and offered the bottle. Micah latched on immediately, his cries cutting off like someone had turned a switch. Clara stood watching, her arms wrapped around herself. What am I doing wrong? Nothing. He's 6 months old. Sarah only passed 2 months ago. He still remembers her smell, her heartbeat. Caleb shifted Micah to a more comfortable position. Give him time. He'll come around. And if he doesn't? Children need consistency, Mr. Mercer. They need to know who's caring for them. If I'm only here temporarily... She cut herself off, but the implication hung in the air between them. If she was only here temporarily, what happened when she left? Would Micah learn to trust her only to have her disappear like his mother had? Would all the children? Would Caleb? How much longer can you stay? He asked quietly. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the endless Wyoming grassland. I'm expected at the schoolhouse Monday next. That gives us 4 more days. 4 days. Less than a week. Then she'd ride away and his life would return to what it had been. Impossible, exhausting, slowly crushing him under its weight, despite Martha Fletcher's promises of help. "We should talk," Clara said, still facing the window, "about what arrangements you'll make. For the children." Martha said she'd help. Martha is 7 months pregnant with her 4th child and lives 5 miles away. She can bring meals, certainly, but she can't be here every day. She can't tend 4 babies while also managing her own household. Clara turned to face him, her expression serious. "You need live-in help, Mr. Mercer. A housekeeper or a wife?" The word wife landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. "I can't just... Sarah's only been gone 2 months. I'm not suggesting you could or should." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm being practical. Those children need consistent care from someone who lives here, who can give them the attention they need. You need a partner to share the burden of this ranch and this family. That's not betraying Sarah's memory. That's honoring the children she left behind." Caleb looked down at Micah, now sleeping in his arms, milk-drunk and peaceful. How does a man even go about finding someone willing to take on 4 babies in a struggling ranch? The same way anyone finds a spouse out here: newspaper advertisements, introductions from friends, mail-order bride services. She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the price of cattle. There are plenty of women back east who'd welcome the chance at a new life, even one that comes with considerable responsibility. You make it sound like a business transaction. Most marriages are, in one way or another. At least out here, people are honest about it. Clara moved closer, her eyes searching his face. Would that be so terrible? A marriage based on mutual need and respect rather than romantic attachment. Is that what you'd want? The question escaped before Caleb could stop it. If you were looking for a husband? Something flickered in Clara's expression. Surprise, maybe, or something more complicated. What I want is irrelevant. I have a teaching position waiting for me, a career I've worked years to achieve. That's not something I'd give up lightly. But if you were looking, Caleb pressed, not quite sure why he couldn't let it go. Would you want romance, or would practical be enough? Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I think I'd want what most people want. To be seen. To be valued. To build something worthwhile with another person. She paused. But I stopped believing in romantic love a long time ago, Mr. Mercer. Life has a way of teaching you that practical partnerships often last longer than passionate ones. There was a story there, heartbreak probably, or disillusionment. Caleb wanted to ask, but Leo chose that moment to burst through the door, covered in mud and grinning. "Miss Clara, Papa, come see. I caught a frog." The moment broke. Clara's expression shifted back to practical efficiency. "Did you? Well, let's get you cleaned up before you show us. You're tracking mud everywhere." She herded Leo toward the kitchen, leaving Caleb alone with his sleeping baby and thoughts that wouldn't settle. That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara made coffee and brought it out to the porch where Caleb sat watching the stars emerge. She settled into the other chair without asking permission, her presence comfortable in a way that made his chest ache. They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, listening to crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Finally, Clara spoke. "Tell me about Sarah." Caleb wasn't sure he could, wasn't sure he should. But something about the darkness and Clara's patient silence made the words come easier than they had in months. She was practical. Like you, actually. We married young. I was 19, she was 17, and neither of us had romantic notions about what life out here would be. We were partners more than anything. Good partners. He traced the rim of his coffee cup. She wanted children badly. We lost 2 before Leo. One was too early, one was stillborn. The doctor said she shouldn't try again, that the pregnancies were too hard on her, but Sarah was stubborn. "Leo, Luke, Hattie, and Micah," Clara said softly. 4 babies in 4 years. The last one nearly killed her. Micah came early and there were complications. She never really recovered. Caleb's voice went rough. She got weaker and weaker. Finally just went to sleep one night and didn't wake up. Doctor said her heart gave out. Said her body just couldn't take anymore. And you blame yourself. It wasn't a question, but Caleb answered anyway. I should have stopped her, should have been stronger, should have said no to more children, but she wanted them so badly, and I couldn't deny her anything. That's not how marriage works, Mr. Mercer. She made her own choices, adult choices, knowing the risks. Clara set down her coffee cup. You can't shoulder responsibility for decisions she made about her own body. Just tell that to the voice in my head that says I killed her. That voice is grief talking, and guilt. Neither one is rational. She turned in her chair to face him. Your wife chose to have those children, chose to take those risks, because she wanted them to exist more than she wanted her own safety. That's not your fault. That's her love for them. Caleb felt something hot behind his eyes. He blinked it back. How did you get so wise about grief? Practice. Clara's voice went distant. I was engaged once, 5 years ago. He was a professor at the college, brilliant and charming. We had everything planned, a spring wedding, a house near the campus, a life built around books and ideas. She paused. Then I found out he was also engaged to a merchant's daughter in Connecticut. Had been for 3 years. I was just his Boston diversion. Christ, Clara. It's all right. It taught me valuable lessons about romantic love and the reliability of men. She said it without bitterness, just fact. After that, I focused on my education, on building a career, on becoming someone who didn't need rescuing or romantic attachment to have a worthwhile life. Is that why you came out here? To get away from Boston? Partially, also because teaching positions for women in Boston are scarce and underpaid. Out here, I can make 3 times what I'd make back east, and I can actually use my medical training when emergencies arise. She smiled slightly. Plus, no one cares if I'm an old maid who was jilted at the altar. Out here, I'm just the new school teacher. You're not an old maid. I'm 32 and unmarried. By any Eastern standard, I'm firmly on the shelf. She didn't sound bothered by it. But that's fine. I've made my peace with it. Caleb wanted to tell her that any man who'd choose someone else over her was a fool. Wanted to say she deserved better than peace with loneliness. That she deserved someone who'd see her strength and brilliance and want to build a life with her. But the words stuck in his throat, too raw and revealing. Instead he said, Thank you for telling me. Fair exchange. You told me about Sarah. Clara stood, gathering the coffee cups. I should get some sleep. Micah will be up in a few hours. Clara, wait. She paused at the door. These last few days, having you here, it's been... He struggled for words that wouldn't sound desperate or presumptuous. The children are happy again. The house feels alive. I didn't realize how much we'd all been just surviving until you showed us what living could look like. Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. Mr. Mercer, I know you have to leave Monday. I know you have a position waiting. I'm not asking you to give that up. He forced himself to meet her eyes. I'm just saying thank you for giving us this week, for showing us there could be something better than what we've had. For a moment, Clara looked like she might say something more, something important. But then she just nodded, whispered, "Good night," and disappeared inside. Caleb sat alone on the porch, watching stars wheel overhead, and wondered if he was a fool for wishing she could stay. The 4th day dawned clear and bright. Caleb's arm was nearly healed, the swelling gone, only a deep ache remaining when he used it too much. He could do most things now, lift Micah, help with breakfast, handle small chores around the house, which meant Clara could leave with a clear conscience. She spent the day preparing, washing her traveling dress, checking her horse's shoes, organizing instructions for Martha Fletcher about the children's routines. She worked with the same efficiency she brought to everything, but something was off. Her smiles didn't quite reach her eyes. Her hands stilled sometimes in the middle of tasks, as if she'd forgotten what she was doing. The children sensed it too. Leo grew clingy, following Clara everywhere. Luke cried at the smallest frustrations. Even Hattie seemed fussier than usual. Only Micah seemed oblivious, finally starting to accept Clara's care without fighting. He'd taken a bottle from her that morning without fussing, and when she'd picked him up after his nap, he'd nestled against her shoulder like he'd been doing it his whole life. Clara had looked devastated. That evening, after supper but before bed, Clara gathered all 4 children in the front room. Caleb watched from the kitchen doorway as she knelt to their level, her expression gentle but serious. I need to tell you something, she said, taking Leo's hand. Tomorrow, I have to go to the schoolhouse. There are other children waiting for a teacher, and I promised I'd come. Leo's face crumpled. But we need you here. I know, sweetheart. And your papa is strong enough now to take care of you again. Plus, Mrs. Fletcher is going to come help. Mrs. Fletcher isn't you. Tears spilled down Leo's cheeks. Please don't go. Please. We'll be good. We promise. Oh, Leo. Clara pulled him into her arms. This has nothing to do with you being good. You've all been wonderful, the best children I could have asked for. Then why are you leaving? Luke asked, his voice small. Because I have a job to do. Just like your papa has a job taking care of this ranch, I have a job teaching children. It's important work. We're important too, Leo said into her shoulder. You are. You're so important. Clara's voice broke slightly. Which is why I need to make sure you're properly cared for before I go. And your papa. She looked up at Caleb, something complicated in her expression. Your papa loves you more than anything in this world. He's going to take wonderful care of you. But Caleb could see the doubt in her eyes. The same doubt that had been growing in him all week. One man couldn't do this. Not well. Not in a way that would let his children thrive instead of just survive. He needed help. Real, permanent help. He needed Clara. But she had a life waiting. A career she'd worked years to achieve. He couldn't ask her to give that up for 4 children who weren't hers and a man she barely knew. Could he? Later, after the children were finally in bed, Leo still sniffling, Luke clutching his blanket like a lifeline, Caleb found Clara on the porch. She stood at the railing, staring out at the dark prairie, her shoulders tense. They'll be all right, he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. Children are resilient. So everyone keeps saying, Clara didn't look at him. Doesn't make it hurt less to leave them. You could stay. The words hung in the air between them. Clara's hands tightened on the porch rail. Mr. Mercer, just listen, please. Caleb turned to face her, his heart hammering. I know this is sudden. I know you have a position waiting. But these last few days, Clara, you've brought life back to this house. Not just for the children. For me, too. You're grateful. That's natural, but gratitude isn't a foundation for... It's not just gratitude. He stepped closer, watching her profile in the starlight. You're brilliant with them, patient and firm, and exactly what they need. And you fit here, like this place was waiting for you. I have a career. You could teach here, in town. It's only 5 miles. You could ride in during the week, come home at nights. He was talking too fast, too desperate, but couldn't stop. Or teach from here. Some of the ranch children need tutoring. You could... Caleb. She finally turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. What exactly are you asking me? He took a breath. Let it out. Took the leap. Marry me. Clara stared at him. You can't be serious. I am. Completely serious. The words came easier now that he'd started. Not a romantic proposal. A practical one. You said yourself that's what works out here. A partnership based on mutual need and respect. I've been here less than a week. Long enough to see what we both need. You need a place where your skills are valued, where you can use your medical training and your education. I need help with these children and this ranch. We could help each other. That's insane. No more insane than any other frontier marriage. How many couples out here married after knowing each other a week? A day? He reached out, stopping just short of touching her. Clara, I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to be my partner, to help me raise these children and run this ranch. In return, you'd have a home, security, a family, and respect. God, Clara, such respect. She was shaking her head, but her eyes told a different story. He could see her turning it over, weighing the possibilities. What about romance? What about... We're both too practical for romance. You said so yourself. He managed a slight smile. But we could have something better, something solid, built on honesty and mutual goals and genuine care for each other's well-being. The children adore you. You know they do. Your wife just died 2 months ago, and Sarah would want this. She'd want her children cared for by someone capable and kind. She'd want me to have help instead of drowning alone. His voice went rough. Please, Clara. At least think about it. Clara turned back to the prairie, silent for so long Caleb thought she'd refuse. Then, quietly, what would people say? That we're practical, that we're doing what's best for the children, that we're two sensible adults making sensible choices. He stepped closer. What do you say? She was quiet for another long moment. Then, I say, I need to think about it. Give me tonight. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Caleb nodded, not trusting his voice, and left her alone with her thoughts and the endless Wyoming stars. Inside, he checked on his children, all four sleeping peacefully, unaware their entire future might be decided by dawn. He thought about Sarah, about whether she'd approve or be horrified. But all he could remember was her voice in those final weeks. Promise me you won't try to do this alone. Promise me you'll find help. He'd promised. Maybe this was how he'd keep that promise. He just had to hope that when morning came, Clara Whitfield would still be there. Caleb didn't sleep. He lay in the darkness, listening to the house settle around him, every creak of floorboard making his heart jump, with the hope that Clara was coming to give him her answer. But the night passed in silence, broken only by Micah's brief crying at 2 a.m. and the sound of Clara's soft footsteps as she tended to him. When dawn finally came, pale and hesitant through the eastern windows, Caleb rose and dressed with hands that wouldn't quite steady. He found Clara already in the kitchen, fully dressed in her traveling clothes, her hair pinned up with severe precision. Her packed saddlebags sat by the door. His heart sank. Coffee? She asked without looking at him, her voice carefully neutral. Please. He sat at the table, watching her move through the familiar motions of preparing breakfast. She'd learned where everything was kept, had developed her own rhythm in this kitchen. The thought that this might be the last time he'd see it made his chest tight. She poured 2 cups, set one before him, and finally met his eyes. Her expression was unreadable. I didn't sleep, she said. Neither did I. I made a list, pros and cons, practical considerations, potential complications. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket, smoothed it on the table between them. Her handwriting covered both sides in neat, orderly columns. I'm a rational person, Mr. Mercer. I don't make decisions based on emotion. I know. His throat felt tight. What did your list tell you? Clara was quiet for a moment, her finger tracing the edge of the paper. It told me that logically, your proposal makes sense. I need security and purpose. You need help. The children need consistent care. A marriage of practical convenience would solve multiple problems for both of us. But logic isn't the only consideration. She looked up at him, and he was startled to see uncertainty in her eyes, the first real vulnerability she'd shown since she'd ridden up to his dying body a week ago. What if I'm not enough? What if the children grow to resent me for not being their real mother? What if you wake up one day and regret binding yourself to someone you barely know? What if none of those things happen? Caleb leaned forward, willing her to hear him. What if instead you become the mother they need? What if we build something good together? What if we both stop being so damn lonely? The last words came out rawer than he'd intended. Clara flinched slightly, but didn't look away. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I don't scare easily, but this terrifies me. The idea of tying my entire future to a man I've known for 6 days, to children who aren't mine, to a life I never planned. I'm scared too. Caleb reached across the table, stopped just short of taking her hand. Sarah and I grew up together. I'd known her my whole life when we married. And I still got things wrong, still made mistakes, still had moments where I didn't know what I was doing. Marriage is terrifying, no matter how well you know someone. That's not reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you. I'm trying to be honest. He finally took her hand, felt her fingers cold against his palm. I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise you won't have regrets. But I can promise I'll respect you, value you, work beside you as an equal partner, and I can promise those children in there will love you like you're the answer to every prayer they've said since their mother died. Clara's eyes were bright now, tears threatening to spill. I wanted more time, to think, to be certain. How much time would be enough? A week? A month? A year? Caleb squeezed her hand gently. Sometimes you just have to take the leap and trust you'll figure out how to fly on the way down. She laughed, a sound caught between sob and genuine amusement. That's terrible advice. It's frontier advice. We're all just figuring it out as we go. He paused. What does your gut tell you, Clara? Not your list, not your logic. Your gut. Clara closed her eyes, took a shaking breath, and when she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression. Some decision made, some bridge crossed. My gut tells me I already love those children, that leaving them will break something in me I'm not sure I can fix. Her voice was barely above a whisper. My gut tells me I've been lonely for so long I forgot what it felt like to be needed, to be part of something larger than myself. And? She pulled her hand from his, picked up her carefully written list, and tore it cleanly in half. Then in half again, and again, until it was confetti on the kitchen table. And my gut says logic is overrated. She met his eyes, and for the first time since he'd known her, Clara Whitfield smiled with her whole face. Yes, I'll marry you. The relief that crashed through Caleb nearly buckled his knees. You will? I will. On one condition. Anything. We're honest with each other, always. No pretending, no polite fictions, no suffering in silence. If this is going to work, we need to be genuine partners. That means real communication, even when it's uncomfortable. Caleb stood, moved around the table, and took both her hands in his. Deal. Honest partnership. Starting now. Starting now, she echoed, and then she was in his arms, trembling slightly, and he was holding her like she might disappear if he loosened his grip. They stood that way for a long moment, two practical people who'd just made the most impractical decision of their lives, until Leo's voice called from the bedroom. Miss Clara, Papa, I'm hungry. Clara pulled back, laughing and wiping her eyes. I suppose we should tell them. Together? Together. They found all four children awake, Leo trying to help Luke out of the crib, while Hattie stood holding the rails, and Micah kicked his legs in the cradle, working up to a proper cry. Good morning, darlings, Clara said, and Caleb heard the difference in her voice, the shift from temporary caregiver to something more permanent. We have some news. Leo froze, his face going wary. You're still leaving? Actually, no, I'm staying. Clara knelt so she was at his eye level. Your papa and I talked last night, and we've decided, if it's all right with you, that I'm going to stay here, forever. Leo's eyes went wide. Forever, forever? Forever, forever. I'm going to marry your papa and become, well, I suppose I'll become your new mother, if that's something you'd want. For a moment, Leo just stared at her. Then he launched himself into her arms with such force he nearly knocked her over, sobbing into her shoulder. Yes, yes, I want that. Please don't go. Please. Luke, not fully understanding but catching his brother's emotion, started crying too. Hattie joined in on principle, and Micah, feeling left out, added his voice to the chaos. Clara held Leo tight, tears streaming down her own face, while Caleb scooped up Luke and Hattie, and for several minutes the kitchen was nothing but crying and laughter, and the kind of messy, overwhelming emotion that comes when something broken starts to heal. Finally, when everyone had calmed down enough to breathe, Leo pulled back and looked up at Clara with serious eyes. Can I call you Mama, or is that wrong because you're not my real Mama? Clara's face crumpled for a moment before she composed herself. Your real Mama will always be your real Mama, sweetheart. No one can replace her. But if you want to call me Mama too, I would be honored. You can have two Mamas, one who's watching over you from heaven and one who's here taking care of you on earth. Leo considered this carefully. Then, Mama Clara? Perfect. Clara kissed his forehead. Absolutely perfect. The practical arrangements happened with frontier speed. Martha Fletcher, when she learned the news later that morning, declared it the most sensible thing Caleb Mercer has done since Sarah passed, and immediately began planning. The wedding would be small, just the Fletchers, Dr. Harrison, and a handful of neighboring families. They'd hold it at the ranch in 4 days, giving Clara time to send word to the school board that she wouldn't be taking the teaching position and to write to Boston to formally close that chapter of her life. 4 days? Clara said that first evening, standing in the doorway of what would soon be their shared bedroom. Is that too fast? Out here? That's practically an engagement period. Caleb was changing Micah on the bed, trying to ignore the awkwardness of the situation. In 4 days, this would be their room, their bed, their life. Having second thoughts? Constantly. You? Every other minute. He finished with Micah's diaper, lifted the baby to his shoulder. But every time I see you with them, every time I watch you move through this house like you've always belonged here, the doubts get quieter. Clara stepped fully into the room, trailing her fingers along Sarah's dresser. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Always. Sarah's things, her clothes, her jewelry, her personal items. Clara turned to face him. I don't want to erase her. This was her home, her family, but I also can't live as a ghost in her shadow. We need to find a balance. Caleb looked around the room, seeing it through Clara's eyes. Sarah's hairbrush still on the dresser, her shawl on the back of the chair, her presence everywhere, preserved like a shrine. You're right. The words hurt, but they were true. The children need to remember her, but they also need to see you as your own person, not just Sarah's replacement. He thought for a moment. What if we packed most of her things in a trunk, kept a few special items out for the children, her mother's wedding ring for Hattie someday, her father's watch for the boys, but made space for your things too? Clara nodded slowly. That seems fair. And Caleb? I'll never ask you to forget her, never ask you to pretend she didn't exist. She gave you these beautiful children. She was part of building this home. I want to honor that. Even though it means sharing me with a ghost? We all have ghosts. Clara moved closer, reaching out to touch Micah's soft hair. The man who betrayed me back in Boston is my ghost. The life I thought I'd have, the career I'm giving up, those are ghosts too. Marriage is learning to live with each other's ghosts and building something new anyway. Caleb shifted Micah to his other shoulder, suddenly needing to say something he hadn't quite figured out how to voice. I can't promise I'll love you, not romantic love, not the way I loved Sarah. I know. But I can promise I'll care for you, protect you, stand beside you, build a good life with you. He met her eyes. Is that enough? Clara was quiet for a long moment, then, it's more than I had before. More than I expected to find when I rode up to your ranch last week. She smiled slightly. Besides, romantic love is overrated. I'll take practical partnership over passion any day. Liar. She laughed, startled. Excuse me? You're lying, to me or to yourself, I'm not sure which. Caleb smiled to soften the words. You want to be loved, Clara. Really loved. Not just valued or respected or appreciated, loved. You're just scared to admit it. Now who's not being practical? Maybe I'm tired of being practical. Maybe watching you with my children this past week has reminded me that there are things worth wanting, even if they're not logical. He paused. I can't promise I'll fall in love with you, but I can promise I'll try. I'll show up every day and try to build something that might grow into love. Is that enough? Clara's eyes were bright again, and when she spoke, her voice was thick. Yes, that's enough. They married on a Sunday afternoon with storm clouds gathering on the horizon and the wind picking up, carrying the scent of rain. Clara wore a simple dress she'd altered from one of Sarah's, practical cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar. She'd spent the previous 3 days sewing, taking in seams and adding new buttons, transforming something that had been Sarah's into something that was hers while still honoring the woman who'd worn it first. Caleb watched her walk across the yard toward where he stood with Reverend Matthews, and his breath caught. She wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. Her features were too strong, her manner too forthright, her age too far from the youthful bloom society valued. But she was striking, confident, real in a way that made every other woman he'd ever known seem like watercolor paintings compared to oil. Leo walked beside her, appointed ring bearer, and taking his job with utmost seriousness. Luke toddled behind, occasionally distracted by rocks. Martha Fletcher carried Hattie on one hip and Micah on the other, bringing up the rear like a practical ant managing chaos. When Clara reached him, she met his eyes with an expression that was equal parts terrified and determined. Caleb took her hand, squeezed gently. Still time to run, he whispered. Where would I go? I already sent my resignation to the school board. Fair point. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. He was a circuit preacher who covered 5 counties, officiating at weddings and baptisms and funerals with equal efficiency. He'd known Sarah, had presided at her funeral, and Caleb could see the questions in his eyes about whether this remarriage was too fast, too soon, too suspicious in its convenience. But he began the ceremony anyway, his voice carrying over the rising wind. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with full knowledge of the commitment being made." His eyes moved between Clara and Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, Miss Whitfield, you come here today as 2 individuals who have faced hardship and loss. You come seeking partnership, seeking to build a family together. Do you both enter into this union freely and with clear understanding of what you're undertaking?" "We do," they said in unison. Matthews nodded. Marriage in the frontier is both different and the same as marriage anywhere else. Different because out here we depend on each other for survival in ways city folk can't imagine. Same because at its core, marriage is about 2 people choosing each other every day, through hardship and joy, sickness and health, poverty and prosperity. He looked at Caleb. "Caleb Mercer, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To honor her, respect her, provide for her, and stand beside her through all the days of your life?" Caleb thought of Sarah, of the promises he'd made 18 years ago to a girl he'd known his whole life. These words were the same, but everything else was different. He was different, older, wounded, carrying grief and 4 small lives that depended on him. And Clara was different from Sarah in every way that mattered. But that didn't make this less real, less binding, less important. "I do," he said firmly. Matthews turned to Clara. "Clara Whitfield, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor him, respect him, support him, and stand beside him through all the days of your life?" Clara's hand tightened in his. For a moment, Caleb thought she might actually bolt. Then she took a breath and spoke with the same calm competence she'd shown when drawing venom from a snakebite. "I do." "The rings?" Leo stepped forward, so careful with the 2 simple gold bands Tom Fletcher had helped Caleb buy in town. Sarah's wedding ring was packed away for Hattie. These were new. A fresh start, a different promise. Caleb slipped the first ring onto Clara's finger. "With this ring, I pledge you my faith, my loyalty, and my partnership. I promise to build a life with you based on honesty and respect. I promise to stand beside you, not ahead of you or behind you, but beside you as an equal." It wasn't the traditional vow. Matthews looked like he might object, but Clara was already sliding the second ring onto Caleb's finger, her voice steady. "With this ring, I pledge you my strength, my care, and my commitment. I promise to honor your children as my own, to help shoulder the burdens of this life, and to be a true partner in all things." Matthews hesitated, then apparently decided frontier weddings allowed for some flexibility. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming and the Methodist Episcopal Church, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He looked at Caleb. "You may kiss your bride." Caleb hesitated. They'd discussed this moment briefly, both of them awkward about the physical realities of marriage. Claire had been clear that she expected the marriage to be real in all ways. "I'm not interested in a celibate partnership," she'd said bluntly, but they'd agreed to take things slowly, let intimacy develop naturally. But this kiss was just ceremony, just symbol. He leaned forward, pressed his lips gently to hers. It was brief, chaste, probably unsatisfying to the small crowd of neighbors watching. But in that moment, Caleb felt something shift, felt the reality of what they'd just done settle over both of them like a blanket. Clara Whitfield was now Clara Mercer, his wife, his partner, the mother of his children. The weight of it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The wedding celebration was simple. Food laid out on makeshift tables in the yard, Martha's famous apple pie, Tom Fletcher's fiddle providing music. The children ran wild, released from the solemnity of the ceremony. Leo kept introducing Clara to everyone as "my new mama," his pride evident in every word. Even Micah seemed content, passed from arm to arm, smiling at the attention. As evening drew on and neighbors began to depart, offering congratulations and advice and promises to visit, Caleb found himself standing beside Clara, watching the sun set in brilliant oranges and reds. "Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly, testing out the name. "That's going to take getting used to." Clara glanced at him. "This morning I was Clara Whitfield, spinster schoolteacher from Boston. Tonight I'm Clara Mercer, frontier wife and mother of 4. It's disorienting." "Regrets already?" "No." She said it firmly. "Uncertainties, yes. Fear, absolutely. But not regrets, not yet anyway." Honest answer. We promised honesty. Clara turned to face him fully. "Caleb, I need you to understand something. I'm going to make mistakes, lots of them. I've never been a wife or a mother. I'm going to do things wrong, say things wrong, handle situations poorly. So will I. I've been a widower with 4 babies for 2 months. I barely know what I'm doing from one day to the next. Then we'll figure it out together." Clara held out her hand. "Partners?" Caleb took her hand, felt the unfamiliar weight of the wedding ring on her finger. "Partners." The first night was awkward. They'd agreed Clara would move into the main bedroom, their bedroom now, while the children stayed in their various beds in the other room. Caleb had moved Sarah's things earlier that day, packing most of them away as they'd discussed, and Clara had brought in her few possessions from her saddlebags. It wasn't enough to fill the space Sarah had left. Clara's things looked lost in the big room, her one change of clothes hanging beside his in the wardrobe, her brush and comb on the dresser looking lonely next to his shaving kit. But it was a start. They prepared for bed in silence, both hyper-aware of the other's presence. Clara changed in the corner while Caleb checked on the children one last time. When he returned, she was already in bed, the covers pulled up to her chin, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I should tell you," she said as he sat on his side of the bed, I don't have expectations for tonight. I know this is strange for both of us. We can take things slowly." Caleb felt some tension. He didn't know he'd been carrying ease slightly. "That's probably wise. We're both exhausted, and this is weird? I was going to say new, but weird works too." He blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by moonlight through the window. He lay down on his side of the bed, careful to leave space between them. "Clara?" "Yes?" "Thank you for saying yes, for staying, for all of it." In the darkness, he felt her hand find his, their fingers interlacing on top of the blanket. "Thank you for asking," she said softly. "For seeing me as more than just a convenient solution, for trusting me with your children." They lay like that, hands clasped, 2 practical people who'd married for practical reasons, trying not to think too hard about how their hearts were beating too fast, or how the warmth of another person in the bed felt both strange and necessary. Eventually, Clara's breathing evened out into sleep. Caleb lay awake longer, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Sarah and promises and second chances, and the woman sleeping beside him who'd ridden into his life with a loaf of bread and turned everything upside down. He thought about Leo's joy when they'd told him Clara was staying, about the way Micah had finally started reaching for her, about how the house already felt different, fuller, lighter, like something frozen had started to thaw. Maybe this would work. Maybe 2 broken people could build something whole together. Maybe practical partnership could grow into something more. Or maybe they'd just make it through each day, one at a time, holding on to each other when things got hard and celebrating the small victories when they came. Either way, Caleb thought, as sleep finally pulled him under, it had to be better than facing it alone. The first week of marriage was an education in compromise and patience. Clara had her ways of doing things, efficient, organized, systematic. Caleb had his own routines, developed over years of ranching and 2 months of desperate single parenthood. Where these methods collided, sparks flew. "The laundry should be done on Monday," Clara said on their 3rd day of marriage, surveying the mountain of dirty clothes with the expression of a general planning a military campaign. "I do laundry on Saturday," Caleb replied. "Monday makes more sense. Start the week fresh." "Saturday means I have Sunday to rest." "You rest on Sunday anyway. Monday is more efficient." They stared at each other. Finally, Caleb laughed. "This is what we're going to fight about? Laundry day?" Clara's lips twitched. Apparently, I'm very passionate about efficient household management. I'm noticing that. He stepped closer. How about this? We try it your way for a month, then my way for a month, and see which works better. That's 6 weeks of testing when we could just use logic to... She caught his expression. Right. Compromise. Partnership. Fine. We'll test both methods. Was that so hard? Excruciating. But she was smiling now. They compromised on meal times, on discipline methods for the children, on how much wood to split, and when to plant the kitchen garden, and whether Micah was too young to start sleeping through the night. Some compromises came easy. Others required long discussions after the children were asleep, both of them fighting exhaustion to work through disagreements before they festered. But slowly, gradually, they found their rhythm. Clara learned that Caleb got quiet when he was overwhelmed, that he needed space to process before he could talk. Caleb learned that Clara got sharp when she was tired, that her criticisms weren't personal but the result of pushing herself too hard. And the children bloomed under the stability. Leo's nightmares became less frequent. Luke started talking more, trying out new words every day. Hattie's smile came quicker. Even Micah seemed calmer, more content. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara was nursing Micah through a rough night. He was cutting teeth and miserable about it. When Caleb found her in the rocking chair at 3 a.m, swaying gently and singing that unfamiliar lullaby. Let me take him, Caleb offered. You need sleep. So do you. You have to mend fence tomorrow. And you have 4 children to manage all day. At least my work doesn't talk back. He held out his arms. Come on, we're partners, remember? That means we trade off the hard stuff. Clara handed over the baby, her face drawn with exhaustion. I don't know how Sarah did this alone while you worked the ranch. 4 children under 3. It's impossible. She had help. Her sister lived with us for a while after Luke was born. Caleb settled Micah against his shoulder, the familiar weight comforting. And honestly, I don't think she managed as well as you think. The house was always a disaster. She was always exhausted. We were always just barely keeping our heads above water. So this feeling like I'm drowning is normal? Completely normal. He reached out with his free hand, squeezed her shoulder. You're doing amazing, Clara. Better than amazing. Look at them. They're happy, healthy, thriving. That's because of you. Because of us, she corrected quietly. I couldn't do this alone either. Micah finally settled, his cries diminishing to whimpers and then silence. Clara stood, stretched, and impulsively kissed Caleb's cheek. Thank you, she said, for this, for seeing me as an equal instead of just hired help. The kiss was brief, casual, the kind of affectionate gesture any married couple might share. But Caleb felt it like a spark, warming something that had been cold for a long time. Go sleep, he told her gently. I've got this. She went, and Caleb sat alone in the darkness with his youngest child, wondering when exactly Clara had gone from practical solution to genuine partner. When her presence in his house had shifted from temporary relief to permanent necessity. When he'd started looking forward to her smile, her laugh, her sharp observations about everything from politics to the proper way to make biscuits. When somewhere in the chaos of daily life, she'd become not just his wife, but his friend. It was a dangerous thing to realize. Friendship could become affection, affection could become attachment, and attachment made loss unbearable. He'd lost Sarah. He wasn't sure he could survive losing someone else he cared about. But as Micah's breath evened out into sleep and the house settled around him, Caleb acknowledged a truth he'd been avoiding. It was already too late to protect his heart. Claire had slipped past his defenses without even trying, armed with nothing but competence and kindness and a determination to make his impossible life somehow work. He was attached, invested, beginning to care in ways that went far beyond practical partnership. And judging by the gentle kiss she'd just given him, by the way her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking, by the small gestures of affection that had started creeping into their daily interactions, she might be feeling it too. The question was what they'd do about it, whether they'd acknowledge this shift from practical to personal, or whether they'd keep pretending this was just a marriage of convenience when it was clearly becoming something more. Caleb looked down at Micah, sleeping peacefully now, and made a decision. He'd promised Clara honesty. That meant being honest about this too, even if it was terrifying. Tomorrow he'd tell her. Tomorrow, they'd talk about what was growing between them and decide together how to navigate it. Tomorrow, he'd take another leap and trust they'd figure out how to fly. But tonight, he'd just hold his son and listen to his wife sleeping in the next room and let himself feel grateful for the strange twists of fate that had brought them all together. Tomorrow came with rain hammering the roof and thunder rolling across the prairie like cannon fire. The children woke scared, Luke crying and Hattie clinging to the crib rails with wide eyes. Clara was up before Caleb could move, gathering them close and speaking in that calm voice that seemed to make everything less frightening. "It's just a storm, darlings. Just noise. The house is strong. We're all safe together." Caleb watched from the doorway as she settled them in the front room. Leo pressed against her right side, Luke on her left, Hattie in her lap, Micah cradled in one arm. She'd become an expert at holding multiple children at once, her body a shelter they instinctively sought when the world got loud. The conversation he'd planned would have to wait. The fence mending would have to wait. Everything would wait while the storm passed and his family needed tending. Family. When had he started thinking of them that way? Not just his children and his convenient wife, but his family, complete and whole, despite how recently it had been assembled. Clara looked up and caught him watching. Something passed between them, some wordless understanding, and she smiled. Not her practical smile, not her capable manager of chaos smile, but something softer, something real. "Coffee?" she mouthed over the children's heads. He nodded, moved to the kitchen, and started the morning routine while she kept the children calm. This was their rhythm now, trading off responsibilities, covering for each other, working in tandem like a team that had been together for years instead of weeks. By mid-morning, the storm had settled into steady rain, and the children had gotten restless. Clara organized them into helping make bread, letting Leo knead dough while Luke made a mess with flour, and Hattie banged a wooden spoon on the table. Micah watched from his cradle, occasionally kicking his legs in approval. Caleb worked on harness repairs at the kitchen table, close enough to help if needed, but trying to stay out of Clara's way. He watched her teach Leo how to fold the dough, watched her patience when Luke dumped flour on the floor for the third time, watched her kiss Hattie's floury nose and make the little girl giggle. She was good at this. Not just competent, good. She genuinely enjoyed them, found joy in their chaos instead of just enduring it. And they knew it, responded to it, bloomed under it. "Mama Clara," Leo said suddenly, looking up from his kneading with serious eyes. "Are you going to have a baby?" Clara's hand stilled in the dough. The kitchen went very quiet except for the rain outside. Clara glanced at Caleb, her expression unreadable. "That's not something we can plan, sweetheart. Babies come when they come." "But do you want one?" Leo persisted with the relentless logic of a 3-year-old. "A baby that's yours and Papa's together?" Caleb saw Clara's throat work as she swallowed. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't talked about whether their marriage would include more children or whether 4 was already more than enough. "I think," Clara said carefully, "that would be wonderful. But I also think the 4 of you are pretty wonderful already. So whether there are more babies or not, I'm happy." It was a diplomat's answer, giving nothing away. Leo seemed satisfied and went back to his kneading, but Caleb caught the flicker of something in Clara's eyes. Longing, maybe. Or fear. Or both. Another thing they needed to talk about. The list was getting longer. That afternoon, while the children napped and the rain continued its steady drumming, Caleb found Clara folding laundry in the bedroom. She worked with precise efficiency, creating neat stacks of small clothes and linens. "We should talk," he said from the doorway. Clara's hands paused. "That's rarely a good opening." "No, I mean—" He stepped into the room, closed the door behind him. "We should talk. About us. About what this is becoming." She set down the shirt she'd been folding and turned to face him fully. "All right. I'm listening." Now that he had her attention, Caleb wasn't sure where to start. He moved to the window looking out at the rain-soaked prairie, gathering his thoughts. "When I asked you to marry me, I said it would be practical. A partnership based on mutual need and respect. No romantic expectations." "I remember." "I was lying." He turned to face her. "Or maybe I believed it at the time, but it was still a lie. Because Clara, somewhere in the last 3 weeks, this stopped being just practical for me." Her expression didn't change, but he saw her hands tighten on the laundry. What are you saying? I'm saying I care about you. Not just as the mother of my children or the manager of my household. I care about you as a person, as Clara. The words came easier now that he'd started. I look forward to talking with you at the end of the day. I find myself thinking about things I want to tell you. I notice when you're tired or sad or frustrated and I want to fix it. He stopped, took a breath. I'm falling for you. Maybe I already have. And I know that wasn't the deal, but I promised you honesty, so there it is. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, her legs apparently no longer willing to hold her. I thought it was just me, she said quietly. What? I thought I was the only one feeling it. This shift from practical to personal. She looked up at him, her eyes bright. I told myself it was just gratitude, or loneliness, or some misguided maternal instinct extending to you along with the children. But Caleb, I can't stop thinking about you either. About whether you're warm enough when you're working outside, whether you're eating enough, whether you're happy. She stood abruptly, pacing to the dresser and back. This wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to be partners, colleagues, not this. Would that be so terrible? Caleb moved closer. If we became more than partners? Yes, because more means risk, more means vulnerability, more means I could lose you and it would destroy me. Her voice cracked. I married you because it was safe, because practical partnerships don't break your heart when they end. But if this becomes love, Caleb, real love, then I'm not safe anymore. Neither am I. He reached out, took her hand. Sarah's death nearly killed me. Not just the grief, but the guilt, the loneliness, the weight of trying to do everything alone. I swore I'd never put myself in that position again, never care enough about someone that losing them would break me. Then why are you telling me this? Why not just keep it practical like we planned? Because I'm tired of being safe. I'm tired of holding pieces of myself back because I'm scared of getting hurt. He squeezed her hand. And because you deserve to know the truth, you deserve to make an informed decision about what this marriage becomes. Clara pulled her hand away, wrapped her arms around herself. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not brave enough? Then we'll stay practical. I won't push for more than you can give. But Clara, he waited until she looked at him. I think you're braver than you believe. You rode up to a dying stranger and saved his life. You agreed to marry a widower with 4 babies after knowing him less than a week. You left behind everything familiar to build a life in a place you'd never been. That's not the behavior of someone who plays it safe. That was different. Those were calculated risks based on logical assessment of circumstances. Was it logical when you tore up your list of pros and cons? She flinched slightly. No. Was it logical when you held me through the fever and let me say things I probably shouldn't have? No. Was it logical when you started calling this place home? When you started looking at those children like they were yours? When you started looking at me like... He stopped, not quite brave enough to finish that sentence. Clara finished it for him. Like I was falling in love with you too? The words hung in the air between them, terrifying and exhilarating. Yes, Caleb said hoarsely. Like that. Clara closed her eyes, took a shaking breath, and when she opened them again, there were tears on her cheeks. I don't know how to do this. How to be in love. My engagement back in Boston wasn't real. He was lying the whole time. And I convinced myself I didn't care, that I was better off alone. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared of trusting someone and being wrong. Scared of giving my heart away and having it broken. I'm scared too. Caleb moved closer until only inches separated them. Terrified, actually, but I'm more scared of living the rest of my life wondering what we could have been if we'd been brave enough to try. What if it doesn't work? What if we try and fail and everything falls apart? What if it does work? He reached up, gently wiped a tear from her cheek. What if we try and succeed and build something beautiful together? What if this practical marriage becomes the greatest love story either of us ever has? Clara laughed, a sound caught between sob and genuine amusement. That's very romantic for someone who claimed to be practical. You're corrupting me, making me believe in possibilities again. He let his hand linger on her cheek. So what do you say, Mrs. Mercer? Are we brave enough to fall in love? Clara leaned into his touch, her eyes searching his face like she was memorizing every detail. I think maybe we don't have a choice. I think maybe we're already there and we're just too scared to admit it. Then let's admit it, right here, right now. Caleb took her face in both hands. Clara, I love you. Not just for what you do for my children or my ranch. I love you for your sharp wit and your competence and the way you make everything better just by being in it. I love how you're kind without being soft, how you're strong without being hard. I love that you tear up lists when your heart knows something your head doesn't want to accept. I love you. Fresh tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. I love you too. God help me. I love you. Even though it's terrifying and illogical and completely contrary to every plan I had for my life. I love you, Caleb Mercer. I love your children. I love this impossible life we're building together. I love all of it. Then she was in his arms, and he was holding her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd forgotten how to say. She felt right there, solid and real and his, in ways that went beyond legal documents and practical arrangements. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't ceremonial or brief. It was deep and real and full of everything they'd both been holding back. Clara kissed him back with an intensity that made his head spin, her hands fisting in his shirt like she was afraid he might disappear. They broke apart only when breathing became necessary, both of them shaking slightly. Well, Clara said breathlessly, that was… yeah. We should probably… the children are napping, but they could wake up any minute, and… Clara… Yes? Stop thinking so much. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Just be here with me. Just let this be real. She nodded, then pulled him down for another kiss that left no doubt about how real it was. The storm passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Caleb woke with Clara curled against his side, her head on his chest, her breathing soft and even. Somewhere in the night, they'd crossed the final barrier from practical partners to genuine spouses, and he felt the difference in every cell of his body. This was what marriage was supposed to be. Not just survival or convenience, but connection, intimacy, love. Claire stirred, lifted her head to look at him with sleepy eyes. Morning? Morning. He brushed hair back from her face. Any regrets? About last night? She smiled, slow and satisfied. Not a single one. You? Best decision I've made since asking you to marry me. He pulled her closer. Second best was not letting you leave that first week. Third best was being foolish enough to reach for Leo's toy horse without checking for snakes. Caleb laughed. Are you saying you're glad I got bitten? I'm saying I'm glad I was riding past when you did. I'm glad I stopped. I'm glad I stayed. She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with an expression so tender it made his chest ache. I'm glad for all of it, even the scary parts, because it brought me here. To you, to them, to this life I never knew I wanted. He was about to respond when Leo's voice called from the other room. Mama Clara? Papa? I'm hungry, Clara sighed. And reality returns. Welcome to family life. Caleb kissed her once more, quick and sweet. Let's go feed our children. Our children. The words felt right in a way that made something settle in Caleb's chest. Not his children that she was helping raise, but their children. A family, real and whole and imperfect and beautiful. The next few weeks passed in a blur of hard work and small joys. The ranch demanded constant attention, fences to mend, cattle to tend, hay to cut and store before winter. Clara managed the household with increasing confidence, finding her own systems and rhythms. The children continued to thrive, Leo's vocabulary expanding daily, Luke's confidence growing, Hattie starting to toddle on unsteady legs, Micah's first tooth finally breaking through. But beyond the daily routines, something else was growing. Little moments of connection that made the hard work worthwhile. Caleb catching Clara's eye across the dinner table and seeing her smile. Clara resting her hand on his shoulder as she passed behind his chair. Stolen kisses in the kitchen when the children were occupied. Quiet conversations after dark about everything from politics to their hopes for the future. They were building something. Not just a household or a family, but a marriage. A real one. based on love and trust and genuine partnership. Martha Fletcher noticed the change when she visited one afternoon, her pregnancy now obvious enough that she moved slowly and rested often. "You look different," she said to Clara, watching her knead bread with easy confidence. "Happy, really happy, not just managing well happy." Clara glanced at where Caleb was outside teaching Leo how to hammer nails, Luke trying to help and mostly just banging the ground enthusiastically. "I am happy, surprisingly, wonderfully happy." "Good," Martha shifted, trying to find a comfortable position. "You deserve it, both of you do. I'll admit I had my doubts at first. The whole thing seemed so rushed, so practical, but watching you two together now, seeing how you are with those babies..." She smiled. "Sarah would approve, I think. She'd want Caleb to find love again, want her children to have a mother who adores them." "You think she'd approve?" Clara had wondered about this often, whether Sarah's ghost was a blessing or a curse on this marriage. "I know she would. Sarah was practical to her core. She'd see what you and Caleb are building and she'd be grateful. Relieved, even." Martha reached over to pat Clara's flower-covered hand. "You're not replacing her, Clara. You're honoring her legacy by loving what she left behind." The word settled something in Clara that she hadn't realized needed settling. She wasn't Sarah's replacement. She was herself, building her own relationship with Caleb and the children. That was enough. That was everything. That evening, after the children were in bed, Clara and Caleb sat on the porch watching the sun set. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at day's end, processing the chaos and planning for tomorrow. "Martha said something today," Clara said, leaning against Caleb's shoulder, "about Sarah approving. Of us." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "I think she would. Sarah was never sentimental about things like this. She'd see you making the children happy, see the ranch running well, see me not drowning anymore. That would matter more to her than timing or propriety." "Do you still miss her?" "Yes, but differently now." He turned to look at Clara. At first, the missing was sharp, like someone had carved out part of me and left a bleeding wound. Now it's softer, like an old scar that only aches when the weather changes. I'll always love her, always be grateful for what we had, but I'm not living in the past anymore. I'm here, with you, building our future. Clara kissed him, slow and deep. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I have something to tell you, something I've been trying to find the right moment for, but there's never a perfect time, so I'm just going to say it." Caleb pulled back slightly, searching her face. "You're worrying me." "Don't be worried. It's good news. At least, I think it's good news. I hope it's good news." She took a breath. "Caleb, I'm pregnant." For a moment, he just stared at her. Then, we're going to have a baby, sometime in late spring, if I'm calculating correctly." She watched his face anxiously. "I know we never talked about more children. I know 4 is already a lot, but She didn't get to finish because Caleb was kissing her, lifting her off the porch step and spinning her around, laughing like a man who'd just been given the greatest gift of his life. "Careful," Clara protested, laughing too. "You'll drop me." "Never." He set her down gently, his hands framing her face. "Clara, this is amazing, wonderful, perfect. A baby. Our baby." "You're not upset? Not worried about having another mouth to feed? Are you joking? This is..." He seemed unable to find words big enough. "This is everything. A baby that's ours together. That we made because we love each other. That's not a burden, Clara. That's a gift." Tears were streaming down Clara's face now, but she was smiling so wide it hurt. "I was so scared to tell you. Scared you'd think I'd tricked you or trapped you or..." "Stop." He kissed her tears away. "You didn't trick me. This is just life happening. Good life. Beautiful life." He dropped to his knees, pressed his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. I'm your papa. I can't wait to meet you." Clara's hands came down to cradle his head, and she stood there on the porch with the man she loved kneeling before her, and felt more complete than she'd ever imagined possible. When Leo found them like that the next morning, Caleb's hand protective on Clara's stomach, her fingers threading through his hair, he climbed into their bed without hesitation. "Are you and Mama Clara making a baby?" he asked with the directness of childhood. Clara and Caleb exchanged glances. Then Clara pulled Leo close. We already made one, sweetheart. There's a baby growing in my belly right now. In a few months, you're going to be a big brother again. Leo's eyes went wide. Really? A real baby? Really, truly? Can it be a sister? I already have brothers. Caleb laughed. We'll have to wait and see. Babies decide that themselves. Leo considered this seriously, then nodded. Okay, but I hope it's a sister. Hattie needs someone to play dolls with. Luke appeared in the doorway then, followed by Micah's waking cries, and the intimate moment broke into the usual morning chaos. But as Clara moved to tend the children, Caleb caught her hand. I love you, he said, just loud enough for her to hear over the noise. I love you too. She squeezed his hand. Now, come on, Papa. Our family needs breakfast. Our family. The words wrapped around Caleb like a warm blanket. This was his family. 4 children he'd had with Sarah, 1 on the way with Clara, and the woman who'd walked into his life at exactly the right moment and turned everything around. He thought about that day with the rattlesnake, how close he'd come to dying, how close his children had come to being orphaned, how a chance meeting with a traveling schoolteacher had saved them all. Some would call it luck. Martha Fletcher called it providence. Caleb didn't know what to call it except miraculous, because against all odds, against all logic, this impossible situation had become the life he'd never dared to dream of. As he helped Clara make breakfast while Leo entertained his siblings, as he watched his wife move through their kitchen with growing confidence, as he thought about the baby growing inside her, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah got sick. He felt blessed, not despite the hardships or the struggles or the grief they'd both carried, but because of them. Because sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. Because sometimes the most practical decisions turn into the greatest love stories. Because sometimes a loaf of bread and a snake bite and a woman brave enough to take a chance are exactly what a broken family needs to become whole again. Winter came early that year, bringing snow that transformed the Wyoming prairie into an endless white canvas. Clara's pregnancy became more visible as the months passed, her body changing in ways that both terrified and amazed her. She'd delivered babies as part of her medical training in Boston, but carrying one was an entirely different experience. Caleb was relentlessly attentive, insisting she rest more, do less, let him handle things she'd been managing just fine. It was endearing and infuriating in equal measure. I'm pregnant, not an invalid, she said one morning when he tried to take the laundry basket from her hands for the 3rd time that week. I know that. I just want to help. You help by trusting me to know my own limits. She softened the words with a kiss to his cheek. I promise I'll tell you if I need to slow down, but right now I need to feel useful, need to feel like myself. You're more than useful, you're essential. Caleb took her free hand, his thumb rubbing circles on her palm. But I can't help worrying, after what happened with Sarah. I'm not Sarah. Clara set down the basket, turned to face him fully. I know you're scared. I am too. But we can't live our lives in fear of what might happen. We have to trust that I'm strong enough for this, that my body knows what it's doing. What if it doesn't? What if something goes wrong? Then we'll face it together, like we face everything. She placed his hand on her swollen belly, where their baby was currently performing what felt like acrobatics. Feel that? That's life, Caleb, strong and determined and fighting to exist, just like this family. The baby kicked against his palm, and Caleb's expression shifted from worry to wonder. It's so strong. I think it's a girl. You can't possibly know that. Call it intuition or hope. Leo's been praying every night for a sister. Clara smiled. Besides, this house could use another woman. I'm outnumbered 4-1 right now. 5-1 if you count me. I definitely count you. She kissed him properly this time. Now stop hovering and go teach Leo his letters. He's been asking for you all morning. Caleb went, but not before extracting a promise that she'd call him if she felt tired. Clara watched him go, love and exasperation warring in her chest. He was trying so hard to protect her from a tragedy that might never happen. She understood it. The ghost of Sarah's death haunted them both in different ways, but she refused to let fear dictate their lives. The children adapted to the coming baby with varying degrees of understanding. Leo was excited, constantly talking about all the things he'd teach his new sibling. Luke seemed mystified by the concept, but accepted it with his usual equanimity. Hattie liked to pat Clara's belly and babble at it in her own language. And Micah, now walking and getting into everything, remained blissfully oblivious to the changes coming. Martha Fletcher visited regularly despite her own advanced pregnancy, bringing gossip from town and practical advice about childbirth. She delivered 3 healthy babies and had opinions on everything from diet to exercise to the best position for labor. "Don't let Caleb coddle you too much," she said one afternoon, watching Clara scrub the kitchen table with determination. "Men mean well, but they'll have you lying in bed for 9 months if you let them. Your body needs movement, needs to stay strong for the work ahead. Tell that to my husband. He acts like I might shatter if I lift anything heavier than a teacup." Martha laughed. "Tom was the same way with our first, nearly drove me mad. But it comes from love, Clara. They can't carry the baby themselves, so they try to carry everything else." "I know, and I appreciate it, most of the time." Clara sat down heavily, her back aching. "But sometimes I miss just being Clara. Not pregnant Clara, who needs constant monitoring. Just me." "You're still you, just you with something extra." Martha reached over to pat her hand. "And speaking of extra, have you two discussed what happens if there are complications? Have you made plans?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken fears. Clara had avoided thinking about it too directly, but Martha was right. They needed to prepare for every possibility. "We've talked about it," Clara said quietly. "Caleb wants Dr. Harrison here for the birth. I agreed, even though I've delivered babies myself and know what to expect. It gives him peace of mind. And if something goes wrong, if you have to choose," Clara's hand went instinctively to her belly. "I've made Caleb promise that if it comes to that, if it's me or the baby, he chooses the baby." "Clara, I mean it, Martha. These children," she gestured toward the front room where Leo was reading to his siblings, his serious little voice narrating a story about a brave knight. "They need a mother, and Caleb needs a wife. But they can find another mother, another wife. This baby only has one chance at life. If my body fails, if something goes wrong, I need to know they'll save the baby." Martha's eyes were bright with tears. "Does Caleb know you feel this way?" "He knows. He doesn't agree, but he knows." Clara blinked back her own tears. "He'd choose me. I know he would. So I've made Dr. Harrison promise that if I'm unconscious, if I can't speak for myself, he'll do what's medically necessary to save the baby first." That's a heavy burden to put on a doctor. It's a heavier burden to let a child die because you were too selfish to make the hard choice. Clara stood, moving to the window to watch Caleb working in the barn. "I love him, Martha, more than I thought possible, but I love this baby too. And I won't let my fear of dying keep this child from living." Martha joined her at the window, both women watching the man who'd become so central to their lives. "You're braver than most, Clara Mercer." "I'm terrified. But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, even when you're scared to death." When Caleb came in for dinner that evening, Clara pulled him aside before they sat down with the children. "I need you to promise me something," she said, taking both his hands. "If this is about the baby again, it is. And I need you to actually promise, not just placate me." She waited until he met her eyes. "If something goes wrong during the birth, if there has to be a choice, you'll choose the baby." "Clara, we've talked about this. I can't." "You can. You have to." She squeezed his hands hard enough to hurt. "Caleb, you survived losing Sarah. It nearly destroyed you, but you survived. You built a new life, found love again. The children would survive losing me too, but that baby, our baby, doesn't get another chance. If we lose this baby because you chose me, we'll both carry that guilt forever. Please, promise me." Caleb pulled his hands away, running them through his hair in frustration. "You're asking me to agree to let you die. I'm asking you to agree to save our child if it comes to that. There's a difference." "Not to me." His voice broke. "Clara, I just found you, found happiness again. The idea of losing you, of the children losing you, then do everything possible to make sure it doesn't come to that. Make sure I'm strong and healthy. Make sure I have the best care. But if despite everything it still goes wrong, then you save the baby. You save our daughter. You really think it's a girl? I know it is. Clara moved closer, resting her head against his chest. And I know she's going to be beautiful and strong and everything we hoped for. But Caleb, I need to know that if I can't be there to raise her, you'll tell her about me. Tell her I wanted her so much I was willing to die for her. Tell her she was loved before she even took her first breath. Caleb's arms came around her, holding tight. Don't talk like that. You're going to be fine. You're going to be there to raise her yourself and tell her all of this when she's older. I hope so, but if I'm not, then I'll tell her. His voice was rough with emotion. I'll tell her about the school teacher who rode up with a loaf of bread and saved us all. About the woman who married a desperate widower and turned his house into a home. About the mother who loved her children, all of them, so fiercely she'd give her life for theirs. Clara cried then, great racking sobs that she'd been holding back for months. All the fear and hope and overwhelming love she felt for this baby, this man, this impossible family they'd built together. Caleb held her through it, his own tears falling into her hair. When she finally calmed, he cupped her face in his hands. But you're not dying. Do you hear me? I'm not accepting that as an outcome. You're going to deliver this baby safely, and then you're going to help me raise all 5 of these children and grow old with me on this ranch. That's the future we're choosing. That's the only future I'm accepting. Clara managed a watery smile. Bossy. Desperate. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. I love you too much to lose you, so you're going to survive this, Clara Mercer. That's an order. Yes, sir. She kissed him back. Now come on. Those children are probably wondering what's taking so long. They pulled themselves together and went in to dinner, both of them wearing forced smiles that didn't quite hide their red eyes. But Leo, perceptive as always, saw through it immediately. Are you sad about the baby? He asked Clara as she served his plate. No, sweetheart. I'm happy about the baby. Just a little scared, too. Why? Clara exchanged a glance with Caleb, then knelt beside Leo's chair, taking his small hands in hers. Having a baby is hard work. It can be scary, but it's also wonderful and beautiful and worth being a little scared. Like when I learned to swim, I was scared, but Papa said I could do it, and I did. Exactly like that. Clara kissed his knuckles. And just like Papa helped you learn to swim, he's going to help me through having this baby. We all help each other in this family, remember? Leo nodded seriously. I'll help too. I'll be very quiet when the baby comes so you can rest. Thank you, love. That helps more than you know. The winter deepened, and Clara's pregnancy progressed. Her back ached constantly, her feet swelled, and sleep became increasingly elusive. But she pushed through, determined to keep the household running smoothly, right up until the moment labor began. Dr. Harrison visited twice a month, checking her progress, and pronounced everything normal. You're strong as an ox, Mrs. Mercer. I don't anticipate any complications, but we'll be prepared for anything. And you remember what I told you? Clara asked quietly while Caleb was outside with the children. About priorities if something goes wrong? Harrison's expression grew troubled. I remember, though I don't like it, and your husband certainly doesn't agree. My husband doesn't have to agree. He just has to accept it. Clara met the doctor's eyes steadily. I'm trusting you to honor my wishes, Dr. Harrison. Can you do that? After a long pause, the old doctor nodded. I can, though I pray to God it doesn't come to that. So do I. Spring came slowly, the snow melting in fits and starts, revealing the brown earth beneath. Clara's due date approached and then passed, the baby apparently content to stay where it was. Caleb grew increasingly anxious, hovering more than ever until Clara finally lost her temper. For God's sake, Caleb, I'm fine. The baby will come when the baby comes. Now please go do something useful and stop staring at me like I'm about to explode. He went, chastened, and Clara immediately felt guilty. She found him an hour later in the barn, mucking stalls with unnecessary violence. I'm sorry, she said from the doorway. I shouldn't have snapped at you. You're right, though. I'm being ridiculous. He didn't stop working. I just can't shake this feeling that something's going to go wrong, that I'm going to lose you like I lost Sarah. Clara moved closer, careful on the uneven floor. You're not going to lose me. You don't know that. No, but I believe it. I believe I'm strong enough to do this. I believe our baby is strong enough. And I believe we're going to have many, many years together, watching all our children grow up and being irritated with each other over stupid things like laundry day. She took the pitchfork from his hands, set it aside, and wrapped her arms around him as best she could with her belly between them. Trust me, Caleb. Trust us. He held her carefully, like she was made of glass. I'm trying. I know, and I love you for it. But you need to let go of the fear, need to have faith that everything will work out. How? How do you have that kind of faith after everything we've both been through? Clara was quiet for a moment, thinking about the question. Because the alternative is living in constant terror, and I refuse to let fear steal our joy. We've been given something precious here, this love, this family, this life. I won't waste it worrying about what might go wrong. I choose to focus on everything that's going right. Caleb pressed his face into her hair. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise. You just didn't notice because you were too busy trying to die from a snake bite. He laughed despite himself, and Clara felt the tension ease out of his body. Fair point. They stood like that for a long while, holding each other in the dusty barn, the smell of hay and horses and new beginnings surrounding them. And when they finally went back to the house, Caleb's fear hadn't disappeared, but it had diminished, enough to let him breathe again, enough to let him hope. The labor started on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks past Claire's due date. She was making breakfast when the first contraction hit, a tightening across her belly that made her pause mid-stir. The second one came 20 minutes later. The third, 15 minutes after that. By noon, they were coming every 10 minutes. By evening, every 5. Dr. Harrison arrived as the sun was setting, Martha Fletcher with him despite being only 2 weeks from her own delivery. They set up the bedroom while Caleb tried to keep the children occupied and calm. Leo knew something big was happening and kept asking to see his mama. Luke cried because he sensed the adult's tension. Hattie clung to Caleb's leg, and Micah, oblivious as ever, played with wooden blocks. Papa, I want Mama Clara, Leo said for the 10th time. I know, buddy. She's busy right now. She's working very hard to bring your new brother or sister into the world. Is it going to hurt her? Caleb knelt down to Leo's level, choosing honesty over comfort. Yes, it's going to hurt. Having a baby is very hard work and it hurts quite a lot. But Mama Clara is strong. She can handle it. What if she can't? What if she dies like my first mama did? The question hit Caleb like a physical blow. He hadn't realized Leo remembered Sarah's death clearly enough to fear its repetition. He pulled his son close, feeling the boy's small body trembling. She's not going to die, Leo. I promise you, we're doing everything possible to keep her safe. But what if... No, what ifs? We're going to think positive thoughts. We're going to be brave for Mama Clara. Can you do that? Leo nodded against Caleb's chest, but his arms stayed locked around his father's neck. Caleb held him, rocking slightly, while Clara's cries filtered through the bedroom door. Each sound felt like a knife to his heart, but he forced himself to stay calm for the children. Martha came out an hour later, her face flushed. She's doing well, progressing normally, but it's going to be a while yet. First babies often take their time. Can I see her? Not right now. She's concentrating, but she asked about the children. She wants to know they're all right. Tell her they're fine. Tell her... Caleb's voice cracked. Tell her we love her. Tell her to be strong. Martha squeezed his shoulder. She knows, and she is. The night stretched endless. The children finally fell asleep in a pile on the front room floor, too unsettled to go to their own beds. Caleb sat with them, listening to Clara's laboring sounds grow more intense. Dr. Harrison came out periodically to update him, each time saying everything was progressing normally. But normal was taking forever. Normal was his wife in agony on the other side of that door. Normal was torture. Around 3 a.m, Harrison emerged again, his expression serious. There's a complication. Caleb's heart stopped. What kind of complication? The baby's in a difficult position. Breech. I'm going to try to turn it, but if that doesn't work... He didn't finish the sentence. But Clara is doing everything right. This isn't her fault. Sometimes babies just don't cooperate. Harrison met Caleb's eyes. I need you to prepare yourself for the possibility that I might have to make difficult choices. No. Caleb stood, terror flooding through him. No, you save her. You save Clara. That's an order. Your wife gave me different orders, quite emphatically. I don't care what she said. You save her first. The baby second. Do you understand? Harrison's expression was grave. Mr. Mercer, I'm going to do everything in my power to save them both. But if it comes down to a choice, I have to honor your wife's wishes. She's my patient. Her autonomy matters. Her life matters more. To you, perhaps. But she's made her decision. As her doctor, I have to respect that. Harrison turned back toward the bedroom. I'm going to try turning the baby now. Pray it works. He disappeared back into the room, leaving Caleb alone with his sleeping children and his mounting terror. He wanted to burst through that door to tell Clara she didn't get to sacrifice herself, to tell Harrison he'd sue him or kill him, or both if he let Clara die. But he'd promised her honesty, partnership, respect for her choices even when he disagreed with them. So instead of barging in, he dropped to his knees beside his sleeping children and prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. 30 minutes later, a baby's cry pierced the night. Caleb's head snapped up. That was good, wasn't it? A crying baby meant a living baby. But what about Clara? Martha emerged, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. It's a girl, beautiful and healthy and already mad at the world for being born. Clara? Tired, torn pretty badly, but alive. Martha's smile widened. She did it, Caleb. She brought that baby into the world, and she's fine. They're both fine. The relief that crashed through Caleb nearly knocked him over. He sagged against the wall, his legs suddenly unable to hold him. Can I see her? Give us a few minutes to clean up. Then, yes. Those few minutes felt like hours, but finally Harrison opened the bedroom door and gestured him in. Caleb stepped inside and his breath caught. Clara lay propped against pillows, her hair plastered to her head with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket Sarah had knitted years ago, was a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair. Come meet your daughter, Clara said, her voice hoarse but triumphant. Caleb crossed to the bed in 3 strides, dropping to his knees beside it. Up close, he could see the strain the labor had taken, the shadows under Clara's eyes, the way her hands shook slightly. But she was alive. Gloriously, miraculously alive. You did it, he whispered. You did it. We did it. She shifted the baby slightly. Would you like to hold her? With trembling hands, Caleb took the tiny bundle. The baby's eyes were closed, her miniature fists waving near her face. She was perfect, absolutely perfect. She looks like you, he said wonderingly. She looks like an old man, Clara corrected with a tired laugh. But I'll take the compliment. What should we name her? They discussed names but hadn't settled on anything definitive. Now, looking at this tiny miracle they'd created together, only one name felt right. Hope, Caleb said. Her name is Hope. Clara's eyes filled with tears. Hope Mercer. It's perfect. She's perfect. You're perfect. Caleb carefully handed the baby back to Clara and leaned in to kiss his wife's forehead. I thought I'd lost you. When Harrison said there were complications, but you didn't. I told you I was strong enough. Clara cradled Hope close. And Dr. Harrison is a miracle worker. He turned her at the last moment, saved us both. Thank God. Caleb buried his face against Clara's shoulder, the fear and relief warring inside him until he couldn't tell which was which. Don't ever scare me like that again. I'll try, but no promises. Babies have their own timeline. She ran her free hand through his hair. Now go get the children. They need to meet their sister. Caleb fetched the children, waking them gently. Leo was up first, his face splitting into a huge grin when he saw the baby. Is that her? Is that my sister? This is Hope, Clara confirmed. Come meet her. Leo approached cautiously, peering at the baby with serious eyes. She's really small. You were too once upon a time. Can I hold her? Clara glanced at Caleb, who nodded. Together they helped Leo into the chair beside the bed and carefully placed Hope in his arms, showing him how to support her head. "Hello, Hope," Leo whispered. "I'm your big brother Leo. I'm going to teach you everything. How to read and how to ride horses and how to be brave when you're scared. And I'll protect you from mean kids at school and from monsters under the bed. I promise." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she watched her oldest son make his vow to his newest sister. Luke toddled over next, poking curiously at the baby's tiny hand. Hattie seemed mystified by the whole thing, and Micah, once he realized the attention wasn't on him, went back to playing with his blocks. But this moment with all her children around her, with Caleb's hand on her shoulder and baby Hope sleeping peacefully, this was everything Clara had never known she wanted. This was family. This was home. This was love in its purest, most chaotic, most beautiful form. "Thank you," she whispered to Caleb. "For what?" "For asking me to stay, for giving me this, for being brave enough to take a chance on a school teacher with a loaf of bread." Caleb leaned down to kiss her. "Thank you for saying yes, for saving my life and my children's lives, for bringing hope into the world, for being exactly what we needed." They stayed like that for a long moment, surrounded by their children, bound together by love and hope, and the kind of partnership that only comes from choosing each other every single day. The frontier was still harsh. Life was still hard. There would be more struggles ahead, more fears to face, more moments of doubt and difficulty, but they would face it together, as a family, as partners who'd become lovers, who'd become everything to each other. Martha was right. Sarah would have approved, would have been grateful that her children had found a mother who loved them fiercely, would have been happy that Caleb had found joy again instead of drowning in grief. And somewhere, Clara liked to think, Sarah was smiling, watching over the family she'd started and the woman who'd finished building it. Two mothers, one watching from heaven and one here on earth, both loving the same children with everything they had. Hope stirred in Leo's arms, making a tiny mewing sound. Clara took her back, settled her to her breast, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. Not in a Boston classroom teaching other people's children, but here on this Wyoming ranch raising her own, building a life with a man she'd fallen unexpectedly, impossibly, completely in love with. "So," Caleb said, settling beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle her. "One more?" Clara laughed, wincing slightly at the movement. "Ask me again in a year. Right now I'm quite content with 5. 5? Caleb shook his head in wonder. "When you rode up to my porch that day, if someone had told me that in less than a year I'd have 5 children and a wife I loved and a house full of laughter again, I wouldn't have believed them. When I rode up to your porch, if someone had told me I'd be married with 5 children in less than a year, I'd have had them committed to an asylum." Clara leaned against him, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "But here we are." "Here we are," Caleb echoed. "And I wouldn't change a single thing. Not even the snake bite? Especially not the snake bite. Best worst thing that ever happened to me." Clara smiled, her eyes drifting closed. "Wake me if hope needs me. I'm just going to rest for a moment." "Sleep as long as you need. I've got this." And he did. Caleb gathered his older children, got them settled back to sleep, then returned to the bedroom where Clara dozed with baby Hope in her arms. He carefully took the baby, settled into the rocking chair, and just watched them both. His wife, his daughter, his family. Outside, dawn was breaking over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. A new day. A new beginning. A future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise, and all the beautiful, ordinary moments that make up a life. Caleb thought about that loaf of bread Clara had been carrying the day she saved him. They'd never actually eaten it. By the time things had calmed down, it had gone stale. But in a way, that bread had done its job anyway, had brought Clara to his door at exactly the moment he needed her most, had started a chain of events that led to this moment, this family, this abundance of love. Sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes it rides up on horseback with a medical kit and sharp intelligence. Sometimes it stays when logic says to leave, loves when wisdom says to guard your heart, builds a life when sense says to run back to safety. Sometimes salvation looks like a schoolteacher named Clara Whitfield who said yes to an impossible proposal and turned it into the greatest love story Caleb Mercer would ever know. Hope stirred in his arms, her tiny face scrunching up, and Caleb smiled. He had a daughter named Hope, and a wife named Clara, and 4 other children who were his whole heart. He had a ranch to run and a life to build, and years ahead filled with both struggle and joy. And as the sun rose on their first morning as a family of 7, Caleb Mercer looked at the sleeping woman who'd saved him in every way a person can be saved, and whispered the words that would become his daily prayer for all the years to come. Thank you for the bread. Thank you for staying. Thank you for love. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and the future waited, full of promise. And inside, a family slept peacefully, bound together by the kind of love that only comes from choosing each other against all odds, building something beautiful from broken pieces, and believing that sometimes the best things in life start with a snake bite and a stranger brave enough to help. The end came not with drama, but with contentment, with a baby nursing peacefully, with children sleeping soundly, with a man and woman who'd married for practical reasons discovering that the heart has its own logic, with a house that had been silent with grief learning to ring with laughter again. The frontier was still brutal. Winter would come again. There would be hard times ahead. There always were. But in this moment, in this house, in this family that shouldn't have worked but did, there was everything that mattered: love, hope, partnership, home. And sometimes, that's all the happy ending anyone needs.